Welcome to our Filmit Shop Talk sessions. We are very excited to have you with us today. What is Filmit and what are our Shop Talk sessions? Well, firstly, Filmit is a high school film competition that we started last year. And now we're having shop talk sessions with industry professionals for learners to be able to upskill themselves to make the best possible movies that they can make for this competition. But it's not just for our finalists, it's for everyone. So anyone who's interested in films, anyone who's interested in making films, telling people's stories, this is for you. So we really hope that you will get everything that you can out of these sessions. Today, our first guest is going to be talking about producing films, being a production manager and producing films. And that is Lynne-Anne Vosloo. And she's the CEO of Moonlighting Films, and she has over 25 years of experience in productions. So welcome, and thank you for being here. We are so excited to have you here. So I'm going to dive right in and ask the first question. What responsibilities does a producer hold in a film and the filmmaking process and the business dealings around making a film?
Well, thank you. Firstly, I'm a little bit nervous, guys. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for having me here today. It's always very exciting to be able to give back to the industry and to people who are looking to get into the industry. So to answer your question, as a producer, it's a very all-encompassing role. You have to kind of be a jack of all trades as a producer, because when it comes to the process of making a film, you're there from the very beginning right through to the very end. So it starts with development. It starts with somebody bringing you a script and you reading that script and thinking, wow, I think we could really do something with this. And then the next step, and probably the most difficult part of being a producer, is the finding the money to make that film, which is always tough. Once you've managed to get the finance together, it's then getting the right people together to make this film. So that would be your director, finding the right cast, and then eventually putting the right crew together. Because without your crew, you really aren't, you aren't anything. Then there's the process of making the film, dealing with all the challenges and all the hurdles and the curveballs that get thrown your way while you're making the film. And then after you've made the film, it's the post-production process. The editing, the visual effects, the whatever. And then finally, seeing that film on TV or on the big screen or wherever. So as a producer, you need to have good business skills when it comes to putting the finance plan together, finding the money. You have to have good people skills because when you're making a film, you're often dealing with a crew of, it can be a crew of up to 300 people, depending on the size of the film. So you're dealing with various different personalities, and with different personalities come different challenges and sometimes conflicts. So in addition to having good business sense, you need to have good people skills, and you also need to be fairly creative because, as a producer, it starts with you. It starts with you identifying a script or a story that you think is going to make a good film. So yeah, it's quite all-encompassing.
You just mentioned a script. What is it that you look for when you're looking at a script?
I think the key thing about making films, and I'm sure you'll all agree, it's all about the story. Is it a story that people are going to be able to relate to? Is it a story that people are going to find interesting? Is it something that's current? Because I also find that in the film industry we go through phases, where sometimes zombie films are the in thing. Every film you see is zombies, or so you've got to kind of be able to judge the current trends as well. Very often, I think if you're presenting a script to a producer, I think it goes a long way to make sure that your script is well written. Because you can have a great story, but if you don't pitch it properly, or if you go so far as to write the script and and actually pitch the script rather than just the idea, if your script isn't well written, it can, your story will fall flat. You could potentially have a great story, but it's all about how you tell that story.
You mentioned that you would look for a director. What is it that you look for in a director of a film?
Well, again, you get directors who are good with a certain genre of film. So over time, you get to know who those directors are. So if you're doing a comedy, for example, you'll know that those are the good directors for comedy. Or if you're doing a drama, you'll know, those are good people to approach. What you will do often is sometimes you'll have a couple of directors pitching on the film. So I think when looking for the director, it's finding somebody that's going to do that particular story justice,
So it's not necessarily about skills as a director, when to make a cut. It's got to do with the way they tell the story, or there are no general skills with regards to being a director?
Well, there are. I mean, you get, as with everything, you get good directors and you get bad directors, So, yes, I mean, you as a director, you need to be familiar with the editing process, because when you're shooting, you're going to know, okay, I've got what I need for that scene. And sometimes with less experienced directors, they don't always necessarily know that. And that's when you get people that overshoot. You'll shoot 50 takes of a scene when a more experienced director may only do 3 takes. So, yes, I mean, you obviously want somebody that's going to do the story justice. You want somebody that knows how to work with the actors, that will develop a good relationship with the actors. But once again, that kind of thing also comes with time and with experience. And we all have to start somewhere. None of us are starting with huge amounts of experience. So I think you have to just, I think very often you just know, especially in the film industry, when someone's got what it takes. They might not have huge amounts of experience, but that over time, that person's going to have what it takes in the industry.
We all know that shooting a film comes down to budget. So do you have any checks and balances that you have to adhere to when you're managing your budget? What do you spend most of your money on?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. It's a good question. I always say that filmmaking comes down to, as a producer or as a production manager, filmmaking for me comes down to 2 things. Or 2 main things. I think it's the budget and it's the schedule. So, when you start off making a film, you've got a budget that you're working to. When you've got smaller budgets, obviously it's more challenging. You have to be more creative in the way that you do things, because you don't just have money to throw at it. If it's a big budget film, it's a different story. But always it's very important to be totally in control of that budget and how the money is being spent. And that's why when you're making a film, having a good production accountant is very, very important. The role and the relationship between the producer and the production accountant is vital, because you're relying on that production accountant to keep track of how the money is being spent. And yes, you have checks and balances in places. For example, you'll have a purchase order system, or you'll have an approval system. So you'll get a quote in for the camera equipment that you plan on using for this particular film. You'll negotiate with the rental company to try and get the best deal that you can. And once you've agreed on a deal, that expenditure has to be approved by, and there'll usually be a chain. It'll start with the producer, then the line producer, then the production manager. It needs to go through an approval chain. And of course, no money ever gets released or nothing gets paid without producers' approvals. So there should be a very strict system in place of approvals. Money just doesn't get spent. So there's a very specific system normally in place, or there should be a very specific system in place to make sure that all expenditure has been approved by the right people.
I think most of our learners are going to be working with very small budgets. So if there's a very tight budget, what are the things that people that you can spend money on? And that if you're thinking of, we are working with learners' films, so what if there is a limited budget, what should it be spent on?
I think, the good thing about the film industry is I find that suppliers in the film industry, especially when it comes to student films and stuff like that, they're usually very willing to donate or do things at a really good price. So I think one of the main things, if you have a limited budget, if you're planning on having real actors in your film, I think that would be an area to spend money on. Because the talent that you end up having in your film can make or break your film. So I think possibly your talent, post-production, because the way you edit the film that also could make or break your film. If the film is not properly edited or badly edited, it could have a very sort of negative impact.
As a production manager, as I understand it, is you involved in all aspects of the final film. Have you ever had to, I'm assuming you have, how do you manage conflict between all the different role players? What is your strategy when it comes to handling conflict? Maybe you can give us an example without mentioning names.
As I said earlier on, when you're working on a film and you're working with, sometimes hundreds of different people, there are various personalities, and obviously with various personalities come, there is the potential for conflict. And I think as a producer or as a production manager, it's very important to remain impartial in any given situation. You can't take sides. Even although you might think or believe that, that person's right, that person's wrong, your role kind of is as the mediator. And I think the important thing is to make sure that you listen to both sides of the story. And, sometimes you may, depending on what the situation is, you may need to even enlist some professional help. but it depends, and it depends on the situation, but 9 times out of 10 it's something that can be resolved quite easily, because sometimes it's just someone's ego that's been bruised, you know, or they feel perhaps you know, they haven't been treated properly or fairly or whatever the case may be. So I think the most important thing is to listen and to remain impartial and to try and come up with a solution that's going to work for everybody, so that at the end of the day, no one person feels like they've been ignored or, you know, hard done by, which is not always easy. It can be tricky, and it can be quite draining, because it happens pretty much on a daily basis. You know, sometimes they're silly things. They're things that really shouldn't become an issue, but funnily enough, they do. Sometimes it's interdepartmental conflicts. You know, it's like the art department feel that they haven't been given the right amount of time to dress a set by the first AD. You know, so it's constantly making sure that each department has got what they need to do their jobs to the best of their abilities. I mean, you asked about a specific incident. I can't, you know, there's nothing really that comes to mind right now, but it's a constant flow of challenges.
So scheduling is then obviously very important for a production manager. So do you have an idea of how much time everything is going to take? Do you consult with the different departments to know how much time they need for a certain thing, or do you give them a time and it's got to be done in that time frame?
Well, it's a bit of both. So right in the very beginning, before you even start making your film, you'll do a rough schedule. I mean, when I read a script, I can tell quite quickly, you know, and also depending on the kind of budget you're looking at, I can tell quite quickly whether it's something you want to shoot or can shoot in 25 days or 30 days or 35 days or whatever. So right in the very beginning, and you know, the industry standard with budgeting is Movie Magic budgeting. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. And then in terms of scheduling, there's Movie Magic scheduling. So those are the two programs that are sort of an industry standard in terms of budgeting and scheduling. So you'll do a schedule, a Movie Magic schedule. You'll break down your script into the various elements, and then you'll create a schedule. So you'll look at, you know, you'll think, okay, I think we need 30 days to shoot this. And then you'll break it up into 30 days. You'll look at how many pages you think you can shoot per day. And that obviously is going to depend also on the content of your script. You know, are you working with animals? Is it an action film? Just recently we produced a film, it hasn't been released yet, but it was a very high action film. I mean, it was real, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but it was real Skopskiet and daughter.
We can edit that out.
And I think, you know, initially we underestimated how much time the action elements of the film was going to take. So I think, yeah, you just need to, you need to look at what you're filming. You know, when you're filming with animals, for example, there's always that unknown, and children as well. There's always that unknown, you know, when you're working with elephants or with horses or with lions or whatever. They're not going to listen to you if they don't want to. So you have to factor that in. You have to factor in the fact that you might lose hours of your day because the elephant doesn't want to do what you want it to do. So those are all things you need to to take into consideration, with scheduling.
As a producer, you are in charge of the whole from beginning to the end. So my question is, do you need to know what's going on in each department? Do you need to know exactly what a director's job is? Do you need to know exactly how editing works, how editing programs work? Do you need to know a lot about acting? Do you need to know everything about everything?
It certainly helps to have a good handle on what happens in each department. Each department has their own HOD. For example, your art department, you've got your production designer that heads up that department. In the makeup department, you've got your key hair and makeup person. In the lighting department, you've got the gaffer who heads up the lighting department. In the camera department, you've got the director of photography. So that's why it's so important to get the right people in place in the very beginning, in those positions. Because you are only as good as those HODs, those heads of departments. So I always say it's really key. I think it's 90% of the battle won when you get the right people together to make your film. You want people that are professional, that are passionate, that are very dedicated to what they do, that are going to be willing to go the extra mile. Because so often in the film industry, that's what you need to do to make a film. You have to go the extra mile. You have to be prepared to go the extra mile. So although as a producer, yes, you definitely need to know what's going on within each department, but you do rely heavily on your HODs to manage those various departments, and they will then report to you. But yes, you need to have a finger on every pulse, definitely.
We have a lot of learners here, and how do you know if you're the right person to be a producer? What type of characteristics, what type of personality traits are found in someone that is a producer?
I think you have to have, I think first and foremost, as any production person, I think you need to be unbelievably efficient and organized. You need to know how to organize your time, because as a producer, you're never really dealing only with one element of filmmaking. You're dealing with various aspects of filmmaking. So you're dealing with all the departments. So you need to, and you only have so many hours in a day. So you need to know how to prioritize. You need to know how much time to allocate to a certain issue. You need to be able to put systems in place, because without systems in place, it's just chaos. You need to have, you need to be able to make good business decisions as well. You need to have good people skills, which, funnily enough, a lot of producers don't necessarily have. Because, and I think especially now, the way things are going, it's more, I think, so yes, I mean, without sort of going off on a tangent, you need to be organized, you need to have good business sense, you need to have good people skills, you need to be able to negotiate well, because there's a huge amount of negotiation that goes into being a producer. You constantly negotiating. You're negotiating with actors' agents to get the best deal. You're negotiating with suppliers in the film industry to get the best deal, because it's all about making it work for the money that you've got. I think those are probably the key characteristics.
That's a great answer. I think we as a young budding filmmakers, I think sometimes the roles are for us a bit maybe confusing. What's the difference between a producer and a production manager?
Okay, so in a production team, you'll get your producer, who's obviously at the top, and the buck stops with the producer. You take on a huge amount of responsibility as the producer, because even although you have people heading up various departments, when there's a problem, when there's an issue, or when something goes wrong, people are going to look to you to address that issue and try and solve that issue. So you've got your producer at the very top, which, as I mentioned in the beginning, you're part of the process right from the word go, from the development to the financing to the physical production of the film and the post-production. So you're there the whole way through. You would then employ, as part of your production team, you'd employ a line producer, you'd employ a production manager, you'd have a production coordinator. Those people are all responsible for making sure, the production team is the hub of making a film. Without a good production team, it can be chaos. It can end up spending you more money. So having the right people in your production team is vital. A production manager is very much dealing with the day-to-day nuts and bolts of filmmaking. Hiring the crew, negotiating deals with the crew, troubleshooting on a daily basis on set. For example, you're busy shooting and your one camera goes down. It's the production manager's job to phone the gear rental company and say, our camera's gone down, we need another camera ASAP. Making sure that we get the new camera in as soon as possible so that we can carry on filming, because the worst thing that can happen on any film set is that you have to stop filming for whatever reason, whether it's because the elephant doesn't want to do what you want it to do, or because the camera goes down, or because an actor won't come out of their trailer. That's any production person's worst nightmare, and that you have to stop filming for any reason. So the production manager is not that involved in the creative process, but very much the day-to-day nuts and bolts and running of the production.
So would it be correct to say that the production manager implements what the producer has planned?
Yeah, that's exactly what they do. Correct.
Can you see when someone is a good production manager? What is the effect of a good production manager on a film set?
You definitely can see when you've got a good production team on board, because things run smoothly. Things run smoothly and things run efficiently. And something else that's crucial in the filmmaking process is good communication. Because you're dealing with so many people and different departments, it's vital that the correct information is disseminated to everybody, and the correct information. Because your various departments can only react to a situation if they have the correct information. So as a production manager, it's important to make sure that the correct information gets out there. And yes, you can absolutely see if you've got a good production team, a good production manager on board. You will generally have a fairly happy crew. And yes, people will know across the various departments, they'll know at any given time what's going on. Another person that plays a very important part in the day-to-day running of a film set and making sure that things are running smoothly is your first assistant director, your first AD. That's the person that runs the floor. They are also the person that's very involved in scheduling the film, because as a producer, I can put together a rough schedule. I can break down the script, I can put together a rough schedule of how I think the film should be shot. But once you actually get into pre-production and you've got a first AD on board, there's so many things you have to consider. The locations, you know, maybe this location is not available on this day, so you can't shoot that scene on that day. You have to shoot it on another day. Your actor's not available on this day, so you have to, or you've only got an actor available for 3 days. And so you've got to make sure that you shoot that actor out in those 3 days. And that's where your first AD is vital, because they'll really get into the nitty-gritty of scheduling the film.
What are the tips that you could give, any like trade secrets almost for a production manager on set? Things that you need, things that backup plans. Can you think of anything?
I think as a production manager, you've constantly got to be thinking ahead. You can never be complacent, you know, because things literally are constantly changing every 5 minutes during the day on a film set, because there are constant curveballs. So as a production manager, to be as prepared as you possibly can be, but at the same time to always be one step ahead, you know, to always be thinking ahead, what could potentially go wrong, and to put as many measures in place to mitigate the possibility of things going wrong. So you do definitely, you know, you can never kind of just relax. You've always got to be thinking about what's coming up next. What are we shooting tomorrow? What are we shooting next week? What needs to be in place for that to happen? So yeah, I think, you know, I think thinking ahead and being organized and being as prepared as you possibly can be, and communication skills are very important. And I also think, you know, sometimes you can get quite caught up in making sure that things are running smoothly, but I think you also have to remember the human element. You've also got to remember you are dealing with people, people with different personalities. Some might be more sensitive than others. I think you've got to, I think that's very important, and I think it's something that I've learned over the years, is your crew. You're nothing without your crew, really. Yes, you can be a hotshot producer, calling the shots, but without the team that you've got working for you, you've got nothing. You know, so it's important to make sure that your crew are happy, that they do feel that if there's an issue that they're being heard. I think it's very important to always, you know, always remember that human element. It's not just about the money. It's not just about, yes, of course it's about the money. Of course it's about making the film in the scheduled time that you've got. But the people are just as important.
It sounds as if the production manager needs to have a very cool head, being able to handle crises. So almost like someone that enjoys adrenaline and stuff going wrong and being able to come up with solutions on the spot. So it's got to be someone that's quite that likes that kind of thing. Am I summarizing it correctly?
Yeah, look, if you are someone that doesn't deal with curveballs very well, then it's probably not the job for you. Having a cool head and being able to stay calm in situations is also extremely important. You know, and also just to, you know, like if there's an accident on set, for example, if your actor trips and falls and hurts their knee or twists their ankle, you know, just to sort of take a step back and handle the situation in a calm manner, and just knowing what steps to follow when something goes wrong. But definitely, and you know, sometimes when things go wrong, you are completely freaking out inside. But you can't necessarily show that. You know, you can't sort of show that on the outside. You do need to, because people look to you. The rest of the crew will look to you, and if you freaking out and going crazy and you know, not dealing with something in a sort of an ordered manner, it affects everybody around you. So yes, having a cool head and being able to stay calm in stressful situations is very important, even if you are going crazy inside.
What is your favorite part of your job?
I think what I do love about my job is I do love working with a budget. I love seeing how I can make things work with the money that you've got. It's very rewarding when you come to the end of a film and you come in under budget. It's amazing. You know, it's like the best feeling in the world. And also when you make a film and you know, for example, this action film I was referring to earlier on, our schedule was 35 days. It should have been at least 40 days, you know, but we made it. We made it work in 35 days. There were a lot of additional things that came up as we went that we weren't anticipating, things that cost more money than we initially thought they would. But we made the film, we actually came in under budget. So it's a great feeling when you come in under budget, when you finish the film on schedule, and you have a happy crew, and people say, this was such a great movie to work on, you know. So I like the challenge of seeing how you're going to make things work with what you've got, and coming up with interesting and creative ways to make it happen.
I think I've always had the idea in my head that a producer is this very authoritative, in charge, take charge type of personality, and I experience you as such a calm-headed person. How do you think your personality helps you as a producer and as a production manager?
You know, as a producer or even as a production manager, you do need to be. You can be kind, and I think being kind is very important in any situation, whether it's in the film industry or whatever you do. But you can't be a pushover, you know, and sometimes people might mistake that kindness for you not being strong, but you can be both, and you have to be both. You have to be strong, you have to know when to stand your ground, because people are going to take chances. You know, people will try and get try and get as much as they want from you, as they can from you. And that's where you need to then be able to know what's right for this film. You know, how much do I give? When do I say no? Am I saying no for the right reasons? Or am I saying yes for the right reasons? You know, ultimately you want to spend as much money as you can on what's going to be on the screen. So it's a kind of a, I think you have to be, as a person, I think you have to be strong. You have to be the kind of person that doesn't take things too personally. And I think that's something, but that's also something that happens with time. When I started in the film industry, I used to take things very personally. You know, if somebody looked at me the wrong way, I would think, you know, what did I do? Have I done something wrong? But as you gain more experience and as time goes by, you know, you realize that sometimes things just are what they are. And I think as long as you don't take it too personally, yes, you need to take things on board, but don't agonize about it, you know, just kind of take it for what it is, assess the situation and move on. I think you need to be, in terms of your personality, I think it helps to be, well, I think in any situation it helps to be honest and fair, But yeah, there's definitely, you definitely have to have that sort of inner strength as well to not just crumble and end up every day in this sad little heap crying in a corner because the day has been so horrendous, you know. So yeah.
So production is quite all-encompassing, and being production manager is managing all the nuts and bolts on the floor. I think that what you said today will resonate with some of the learners here and some of the learners watching. What would you say is advice to someone who wants to become a production manager or even a producer? What advice would you give them?
I think if you want to be a producer, I mean, the chances are, if you want to be a producer, you know, you want to make films. So the chances are that you might have some ideas for stories. You could even be a producer-writer. You know, you could write this, if you have that talent, you could write the script and you could produce it. So you, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now.
What advice would you give someone who wants to be a producer? Where should they start?
Okay, so I think, you know, we were discussing earlier on, in South Africa now, there are a lot more opportunities to study film. When I started in the film industry, the way you got into the film industry was to kind of get in at the very bottom as a production assistant or a runner, or in my case, I worked for a catering company and I served the teas and coffees on set. That's how I started, and that's how a lot of my generation of film people in South Africa started. And personally, I think that hands-on experience and working your way up from the bottom it's invaluable. Having said that, you know, if you have the opportunity to go to film school, I think that's very valuable as well. You get a good sort of basic knowledge, I think, if you go to film school, of what the film industry is all about. I would imagine that, you know, they focus on various aspects and departments of filmmaking. So I would hope that by the time you come out of film school, you've got a very good general idea of what filmmaking is all about. So I think if that's open to you, if going to film school is open to you, then yes. But I don't think it's the beginning and the end of being in the film industry or being a producer. You know, it's something as simple as having a script, finding the money to make that film, and then making the film. You know, that's being a producer. And, you know, sometimes you get lucky, you know, and I find that now with all the streamers that are in Africa, you know, like Netflix and Showmax, Netflix and Showmax, there's so many more opportunities open to young filmmakers because they are willing to spend the money, you know. So if you've got a great idea and you go to Netflix or you go to Showmax, there's a good chance that, you know, they may fund your film or your series or whatever. As a production manager, I think, again, it's very hard to just walk into a film as a production manager. You know, you start off generally as a production coordinator, and then from a coordinator, you'd work your way up to a production manager, then from a production manager to a line producer. Very often it's about someone seeing the potential in you and giving you the opportunity. You know, we get calls all the time. We get CVs that get sent to us. We get calls, people that are desperate to be in the film industry. And it's, you know, it's about, sometimes it's just pure luck. It's about meeting the right person. It's about showing that you have what it takes, and someone giving you the opportunity. So yeah, sometimes it really is just about luck.
Luck, willingness to work hard, and willingness to start at the bottom, hey, with very little reward maybe.
Yes. Again, this is probably showing how long I've been around in the film industry, but so many of my contemporaries in the film industry, my generation of film people, very few of us, actually, I don't know any of us that went to film school. And it's definitely about being willing. And even if you come out of film school, yes, when you come out of film school, you might know, I want to be a director or I want to be a producer. But you're never going to, yes, you could make your own small short film as a director or as a producer. But you really, if you're going to then go and work on a movie that's being shot in South Africa or in Cape Town, but it's a studio film, it's Paramount or it's Warner Brothers or whatever. If you've just come out of film school, the chances are that, if you're lucky, if you want to be a director, you may get an opportunity to work in the AD department. So you may be a third AD or a second AD. But yeah, that sort of being willing to start at the bottom. And starting at the bottom in the film industry is not easy. It's certainly not glamorous. You do end up doing kind of the work that no one else wants to do.
I can understand that. Is there any time for questions? All right. So is there anyone from the floor who'd like to come up and ask a question? For Lynne-Anne Vosloo.
Hi, I just got a question. So you mentioned that there's two kind of for a producer. You get your budget and your scheduling. I just want to know if you can go more into scheduling and also what you should prioritize. Like what budget should you go more into? Pre-production, production, post-production. I know it does vary between kind of different genres, but can you give a better general idea of what should have priority over other things?
Well, when you're doing a budget, the first thing you do, as I mentioned earlier on, is you try to gauge how much time you need to shoot this film, which will depend on the script. And once you've done that, that's the great thing about the Movie Magic budgeting program. All the elements are already in there for you. So you can plug in, okay, so I want to shoot this film in 25 days. You then need to work out how much pre-production time do you need to get ready to make the film. Because pre-production is really important. I mean, if you're, there's a saying that goes that your movie is actually made in pre-production. Because if your prep is good, then the idea is that the filming will go well. So you work out, if I'm doing a 30-day film, if it's not a big budget film, then maybe I need 6 or 7 weeks prep. It depends on what you need to achieve in that prep period. Are you building sets? Do you have to train your actors to fight? Do you have to train animals? So you figure out kind of what needs to happen in that prep period. The post-production period, it's a long process. The editing, the visual effects, it takes months. But as time goes by, you kind of get a sense of how long things are going to take and what's needed. I mean, there are shortcuts that you can take, because sometimes if you don't have a lot of money, you've got to reduce your pre-production period. So, it's kind of a formula. And I think it all starts with it all starts with the script and how much time you think you need to make that film. So the scheduling and the budgeting kind of go hand in hand. When we do budgets, we start by breaking down the script and doing a rough schedule, because then your budget flows from that.
Any other questions?
I'm glad there's someone who's got questions.
So, just another question. What do you suggest, or how do you suggest that producers get money for films?
That's the million-dollar question. In South Africa, there are various foundations or some government departments that you can apply to for funding. You know, there's the NFVF, the National Film and Video Foundation, there's the IDC. So there are various entities that you can apply for funding from. They don't make it easy to get that funding. They really don't. And I think that's, personally, I think that's partly why our local film industry has kind of struggled to grow, because it's so hard to get the funding. You could get private funding. You know, you could approach a millionaire and ask him to lend you some money. But, you know, obviously at some point you're going to have to pay that money back. So, and you know, there's also a tax incentive system in South Africa. So you can, as an emerging young filmmaker in South Africa, you can apply to the Department of Trade and Industry for a tax rebate. You know, you can get up to 50% back. So there are various ways. But like I said before, I think that's probably the hardest part, which is why, you know, when you start out, you are making films for, you know, a couple of R100,000, or it's also figuring out how to make it for the smallest amount possible. But yeah, it's not easy accessing funding of any sort, really.
Any last questions from the floor? Please come up.
How necessary do you think it is for to have people managing each department? And also, do you think it's important, is it necessary to go to film school, or can you maybe later on decide you want to go into film?
I think it's vital to have people managing each department. You know, that's why you have your heads of department. And I think you know, I come back again to saying it's so important making sure you've kind of chosen the right people to make the film.
Can I interrupt you there? I just want to know the heads of departments you're talking about. We're a lot of the film clubs in these schools are maybe 10 learners. What are the heads of departments do there have to be, do you think?
I think obviously your producer, who's overseeing the whole thing. In your camera department, your director of photography obviously is vital. A production designer, because that's the person who's going to, with the director, design the look of your film. I think your technical HODs are also important. You know, you need a gaffer and you need a grip. So, and yes, you know, you need when it's a small crew, your department could maybe just be one person. But that person does need to take control and take responsibility for that department. You know, when you are a very small group of people, you may have one person that is working as the production designer and maybe the costume designer, you know, because they're both very creative roles. So you could potentially have one person doing both. but yes, I think even if you do have one person that's heading up more than one department, it is very important to have someone responsible, someone in charge of those departments or of that department, to just make sure that things are running smoothly, and to report to the producer if there is an issue. And the second part of your question, you know, do I think one needs to go to film school? You know, I think no education is ever wasted. And I think, as I said earlier, I think if you have the opportunity and if that's your thing, then yes, by all means. But I don't think it's the beginning and the end of working in the film industry. There are also some great, you know, there's some training programs. So you can start off as a trainee or an intern in the film industry, which also helps. But I mean, me personally, I think there's no better experience than the hands-on, but that's just me, I'm a bit old school. You know, I think there's no better experience than that hands-on experience and, you know, starting at the bottom and working your way up the ladder, and it's rewarding as well.
There was a question at the back there. Come. Last question. Make it a good one.
I was always genuinely curious about the animal aspect. You mentioned that they're not obedient / not cooperative. Well, my question is, how do you direct them / manipulate them into doing what you want to do?
So what we do is, you know, we have animal trainers. There are animals that we work with in the film industry that are trained for film, but there's always that unknown when you are working with animals, because even although they're trained, at the end of the day, they're still wild animals. You know, something could happen to give them a fright. And, you know, if you're working with horses, for example, it could be something, a rustle in the grass or something that gives the horse a fright and it sort of bolts off in the other direction. So when you're working with trained animals, the chances of something going awry are probably less, but there's always that possibility. And that's why it's important when you are working with animals to have the right animal trainer on set. It's also very important, what we also do on set, you always have a representative from either the SPCA or Animal Anti-Cruelty to make sure that animals are being treated fair, properly on set. Because as with actors and as with children, you don't want to overwork them. Like for example, when you're working with elephants, the guy we work with up in the Northwest, he only allows his elephants to work for 6 hours a day, because it's stressful for them. It's not what they normally do. I worked on a film called Black Beauty a couple of years ago, which obviously was all about horses. And there's so many things you need to take into consideration. For example, when you're working on a new location, we had to take the horses there in advance so that they could get used to the location, so that you're not just bringing them there on the day and expecting them to do what you want them to do. So, to mitigate the chance of things going wrong, once again, it's preparation, whether it be with animals or with your actors or with children. Yeah, preparation is key. And I know I've kind of veered off the whole animal thing, but I think, and sometimes it's just a chance you take. With animals, you need to allow more time. Sometimes you'll capture something on film that you weren't expecting to capture on film with animals. So it's patience. And again, allowing time in your schedule for the unknown.
I think producer and planning, I think those two things go hand in hand. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise. And I think everyone's going to want to go watch some of your movies today. So Lynne-Anne Vosloo talking to us about production, being a producer and being a production manager. Thank you very much. And we'll see you for our next Shop Talk session.